What's up, everyone? It's King Moose here with JCross X to welcome you all back for episode 17 of Class Overview. For those who aren't familiar, the Class Overview series is a collection of informative videos where we'll be discussing the different classes in Fire Emblem Three Houses.
We'll be going over general information about each class, like their certification requirements, stats, abilities, and their overall strengths and limitations to determine their viability and what units are a good fit for each class. As per usual, these videos will be gameplay focused, so there shouldn't really be any major spoilers, but I advise you anyways to watch at your own discretion, and if you haven't played Three Houses yet, you absolutely should.
This episode will be focused on the Brigand class. It's a basic 5-move infantry class with no class abilities. As we've reiterated several times with physical classes so far, this class retains access to brawling, but doesn't allow access to a unit spell list. The Brigand certification is pretty simple. It just requires at least a C rank in Axes and nothing else, which is a strictly easier version of the Armor Knight certification. Axes are a great weapon type in Three Houses, and since the pretty useful combat art Helm Splitter is learned by every unit at C Axes, this requirement isn't a lot to ask for. However, for units who have a Bane and Axes but still want to go Brigand, you may want to consider gambling at a D+ rank, which still has a high success rate. As for the skill level bonuses, Brigand grants a +2 experience boost to Axes and +1 to Brawling. Raising Axes is great as they are not only a really good weapon type in this game, like I mentioned before, but a lot of advanced and master classes require a high axe rank, like Warrior, Fortress Knight, Great Knight, and most notably the powerful flying classes Wyvern Rider and Wyvern Lord. The Brawling boost is a little random, it doesn't make a big difference, but for male units it does incentivize you towards a potential endgame option of War Master, which requires both Axes and Brawling. Overall, this is a class that is very easy to certify into, and while the skill rank bonuses aren't anything special, they open up a lot of options for promotion paths, which is great for maintaining variety among your physical units.
Moving on to the stats, Brigand's base stats are pretty shoddy aside from one slight standout. Most of the stats are equal to or lower than some of the stats of the intermediate physical classes we've already discussed. However, its base strength is the most notable as is the highest out of the intermediate classes, sitting at a solid 10. As per usual, there is still a slight chance you may gain a few points if you're starting with really low bases and other physical stats, but if you want to patch up strength at this stage in the game, Brigand is definitely the way to go and is a decent reason for certification. However, this is definitely not as common of a reason to certify into the class compared to Armor Knight for defense or Thief for speed, as those bases are a bit higher. The growth rates are actually pretty solid though, as a plus 20% growth rate boost to HP for most intermediate classes is actually a plus 30% for Brigand, while also having a pretty significant plus 10% growth modifier to strength. Additionally, it also has the standard plus 5% growth to charm, while also suffering a mild minus 5% growth to res, which is really not that impactful. Honestly, there really isn't anything bad here, as the extra HP growth alongside a 10% boost to a very important physical stat to increase means that this class is relatively min-max for the stage of the game, unlike something like Cavalier, which had a bunch of what were mostly inconsequential plus 5% stat modifiers. The stat boosts of Brigand follow the growth modifiers and are slightly above average in my opinion. The class is a +2 in both strength and HP, both of which are pretty useful at this point and definitely help the class a little bit as it has nothing really unique or special combat-wise. There isn't much else to say regarding the class statistically, it's just pretty decent since it focuses on two stats that are quite useful for physical units.
Upon mastering Brigand, you will gain access to the equipable ability Death Blow, which grants a unit +6 strength when initiating combat. This ability, as discussed with Armored Blow previously, only applies once per instance of initiating combat in the player phase. If you are able to act multiple times in the same player phase via Dance or the combat art Raging Storm, Death Blow will apply once to each instance of combat but it won't stack multiple times, and the strength boost will not carry over in enemy phase. Even if it was just a flat +6 boost to damage on all physical attacks in the player phase, this would be an extremely useful ability, but it has a much higher ceiling. By taking advantage of things like doubling, brave weapons, and brave combat arts, you can apply this boost twice in the same instance of combat, or even up to 4 times when using gauntlets, similar to what we mentioned with strength +2 but on a significantly higher scale. This is an incredible boost to kill power on all player phase or dual phase oriented physical units, and it turns already powerful combat arts like Swift Strikes, Hunter's Volley, Point Blank Volley, and Fierce Iron Fist into very consistent 1-rounds. In some cases, Death Blow may even give a small increase in attack speed due to the increased strength allowing the unit to offset more weapon weight, which is a nice extra bonus.
The skill rank bonuses and stats of this class are pretty decent, but obviously there is really just one very notable attribute to dial into when discussing the strengths of Brigand. Of course, I'm referring to the cracked player phasing oriented mastery known as Death Blow. As Josh just mentioned, Death Blow by itself is already pretty good, as a +6 strength when initiating combat is a decent flat boost, but can also be taken advantage of in other ways given how many options there is for hitting your opponent multiple times, therefore utilizing the boost multiple times. The strength also potentially offsetting weapon weight is nice, especially for faster units who can potentially double while using this ability. Even though it is certainly better on units who can activate its effect multiple times, it is still a very strong and important ability for slower yet slightly higher strength units who might just need that little extra help to secure that kill on an enemy. 6 damage is nothing to scoff at either, especially when coming off strong combat arts. In general, there really is no bad option for slapping this ability onto on the physical side of things, unless they're strictly an enemy phaser. This ability can even see use on dual phasing builds, assuming there isn't a scarcity for available ability slots in said builds. With that being said, that is about the extent of the strengths for Brigand. Don't get me wrong, Deathblow is fantastic and basically carries the entire class, but most of the time you just want to pick it up and get out of Brigand as soon as possible unless you are finished with your other intermediate masteries and want to focus on raising Axe skill rank or potentially taking advantage of the strength growth modifier.
While this class is statistically pretty solid and it has an amazing mastery, the main weakness of this class is the combat performance. It suffers from just being a very basic 5-move class with no class abilities or any other defining features to give it a unique identity in combat. The best thing I can mention about its performance is the +2 boost to strength, but this really doesn't make that much of a difference compared to benefits of other classes. Its performance is average compared to Mercenary, Thief, Lord, Armor Knight, and Brawler, but unfortunately they all have the same problem in the sense that they need to be compared to the 3 elite physical intermediate classes, Archer, Cavalier, and Pegasus Knight. Archer has the same movement as Brigand while being able to utilize the extremely useful Bow Range +1 ability, and Cavalier and Pegasus Knight both have higher base movement supplemented further by Canto. These benefits allow them to contribute much more in combat, which not only makes battles easier, but also makes it quicker for them to level up and master their classes. When you have options like those 3 classes at this stage, the time spent mastering Brigand can feel very punishing, especially since some of the harder chapters in the game, like Chapter 5 and Chapter 6 assuming you don't just skip it, take place during the intermediate stage. It's very similar in a Mercenary in the sense that the class's only identity is its mastery, and if it had one of the mediocre masteries abilities instead of Deathblow, then it would be unlikely to see any use at all.
With all these strengths and weaknesses taken into account, we've decided on a final rating of 7 out of 10 for Brigand. This class is basically just Mercenary version 2, but this time specialized with a better weapon type and even better mastery. Feels like we're beating a dead horse at this point, but the class is definitely carried by Deathblow. Combat-wise, it pretty much has nothing going for it besides decent boosts, since it doesn't even have a class ability. Deathblow enables and benefits all the physical unit archetypes to some extent, and as I said earlier, there really isn't a reason not to use it on a physical build unless they are strictly an enemy phaser, due to the condition of needing to initiate combat to trigger its effect. It's also important to note that while staying in this class could potentially hurt your progression if there are still masteries you plan on unlocking for a specific unit, staying in it won't hurt their growth statistically. Stat growths are good, and while the combat performance will always be somewhat subpar, they definitely still will be hitting pretty hard. As for recommendations, well, we don't really have any standout ones for you this time. If your unit is physical and isn't an enemy phaser, master this class since pretty much every physical unit in the game will want to master it at some point for Deathblow. More specifically, pretty much any unit that naturally has access to a Brave Combat Art will generally be a unit you want to make sure gets Deathblow. That list is limited to Sylvain, Ferdinand, Cyril, Leon, and Sedith. Some units who could spend some time in it for a decent strength growth could be Caspar or Raphael, as they both have axe boons and fit into the somewhat slower but stronger units that could appreciate the extra growth for strength. Other than that, just grab the mastery and move on with the plethora of other intermediate masteries you may want to pick up at this time.
With that being said, we're going to put Brigand near the top of B tier. Its combat performance is the only thing dragging this class down, but if this placement was purely determined by how good the mastery is, Brigand would be an easy lock for S tier. Every physical unit should master it unless you're building them exclusively for the enemy phase. It's a very similar class to Mercenary in the sense that it's a mediocre class carried entirely by its mastery, but Brigand is definitely a lot better because Deathblow benefits a much larger amount of units than Vantage, especially in a game as player phase focused as 3 houses. That's basically all we have to say about the Brigand class. If you like the video or have any thoughts of your own, please leave a like and make sure to comment.
I also recommend checking the description if you're not already subscribed to both of our channels.
Stay tuned for episode 18 on JCross's channel, where we'll be moving on to the next intermediate class, Archer.